And our next guest is original host of the Zero Hour, Richard Eskow. And today we're going to be talking about Trump's pick for the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh. He comes from the D.C. Court of Appeals to replace the retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy. And I have tried to figure out how many threats Kavanaugh poses to everyday Americans, and the list just keeps growing and growing. So to help us make sense of this, I thought we would give RJ a call and have him help us make sense of just how dangerous Kavanaugh is to the Supreme Court. So RJ, thanks for joining us.
Sure, my pleasure. And just one slight correction there, Sanjeev. I am the original and current host of the Zero Hour. I got to watch myself when I go out of town. No, I'm joking, of course. So thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you. And so, I obviously, as a physician and a public health advocate, I'm mostly concerned with what Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court would mean for a range of health policies. But I was really concerned also about consumer protections, and I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit more on that and share with our audience what those dangers are.
Well, I think there are a couple ways to look at Brett Kavanaugh. First of all, when he was first appointed to the federal bench by George W. Bush, I would say that Senator Ted Kennedy got him right. He called Kavanaugh, and I quote, a political operative. And of course, that would mean he's a political operative for the most corporatist Republican Party in history, and that's saying a lot. Ted Kennedy also said in 2006, quote, I can say with confidence that Mr. Kavanaugh would be the youngest, least experienced, and most partisan appointee to the court in decades. Now, what he's already shown while on the federal bench is that he's willing to rule not just against the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which he did in a case of an institution called PHH. Not only is he willing to rule against the CFPB when it tries to rein in this case, a mortgage lender that abused its customers, but he's willing to do so in a way that challenges the existence of the CFPB, meaning the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, of course, altogether. So what Kavanaugh really is trying to do here is undermine the entire premise that presidents are allowed to appoint regulators. When Kavanaugh talks about separation of powers, for example, he's more than happy to give the President of the United States executive powers that I think no judge in history or no Supreme Court judge in history before him would have considered giving. For example, the ability to overrule Congress, the ability to, on certain matters, the ability to be free of lawsuits or the kind of restrictions of law that other citizens are bound by. He's willing to do that, but he's also willing to say a president that he doesn't agree with can't even regulate runaway industries like the banking industry, whose fraud crashed the U.S. and global economy in 2008. So he, in that case that I was talking about, the PHH case, he vacated $103 million in fines from the CFPB, and he basically suggested that it had no right to impose that fine at all. And this is part of the corporate-funded war on the very concept of regulations that the Republicans have been pushing for a long time. And by the way, another word for regulations is protections for the American people. So that's where we are with this guy.
And that's something that I find so scary about Kavanaugh is that for everyday people, organizations and agencies like the CFPB are the only watchdogs that we really have when it comes to Wall Street, the big banks, the kinds of groups that wield such power that, like you're saying, need to have, checks and balances and reins on that power, because the average consumer, the average homeowner has no real power against these big banks and mortgage companies. And it's really scary to think that this judge is not thinking about the everyday American when it comes to what his rulings would mean.
Yeah, I mean, I could be only slightly rhetorical and say he's thinking about the everyday American. He's thinking about how to screw the everyday American. But the fact, and there's some truth to that. But it's not so much that it's not an oversight on his part. It's ideological. It's political. This guy was a political operative from way back, and he worked with Judge Kenneth Starr. Now, I happen to think Bill Clinton was an idiot with the Monica Lewinsky thing, if not worse. But that said, he's the guy, for example, who worked with Judge Starr on making sure that the most salacious questions were asked about the precise nature of the sexual acts between Clinton and Lewinsky were asked of the president, not because it was germane to the case, but just for the dirty kind of dragging both Clinton and Lewinsky through the mud. So, I mean, this is a guy who will do lousy things, despite what people might have read in the Washington Post in the last couple of days about how he's a wonderful, what was the word, a carpool dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other that from his professor in the New York Times saying he's a thoughtful man. This is a guy who will drag people through the mud when he doesn't agree with them, and he will drag the American consumer through the mud if and when he makes it onto the Supreme Court.
And, when I have to think about my patients and families and how they're going to, how are they going to make it with the Supreme Court that's so hostile towards basic health justice and basic health rights? Because when I look at the three areas of health that I'm most concerned about with Brett Kavanaugh, one is whatever is left of the Affordable Care Act, and most importantly, the protections for patients with pre-existing conditions. A second one is obviously that a conservative majority can make abortion services practically unavailable, especially to low-income women. And then the third one is that it's doctors like me and other physician activists and other public health activists who keep Medicaid accountable to patients and families. And so when a state legislature eventually decides to play around and deny funding to Planned Parenthood, it's actually physician activists who are able to take the state to court and say that what you're doing is wrong. You have a mission to fund Medicaid for these public health objectives. And a guy like Kavanaugh looks at that kind of a lawsuit and just throws it out. And that's dangerous for public health. So, I was just kind of wondering, your thoughts about all of these threats to public health and what we should be communicating to our members of Congress.
Well, I think it's a devastating decision for public health, just to be blunt. I think that, first of all, I think we can assume that the pre-existing conditions rule is pretty much dead. That's going to make it, if he is in fact confirmed, that's going to make it to the Supreme Court at some point. It's working its way through the courts now. The case was filed by Texas and some other conservative states. When it gets to the Supreme Court, they will have a majority to get rid of the pre-existing conditions protection, which is, as you well know, absolutely devastating. Now, people are predicting where or how he will overturn Wade. He will allow the court to overturn Roe v. Wade, whether it will be open, clear, that no longer exists, or whether it will be through sort of covert chipping away at it, not overturning it blatantly, but overturning it in effect. I suspect it'll be the latter, but either way, Roe v. Wade is definitely, seriously, very likely to be overturned if this guy is confirmed. And by the way, he's been trying to deceive people on that point because he's been saying, well, I respect the precedent of Roe v. Wade. Well, he's already on record as saying he doesn't believe in Supreme Court precedents. He believes in going back to the original intentions as he imagines them in his fevered brain of what the founders intended to do when they wrote the Constitution. So he's basically made it clear that he has no intention of preserving Roe v. Wade.
And, I think that is a message that, regardless of, I don't think you have to be a woman to appreciate just how dangerous that is to health. But we need our members of Congress to hear these threats. And what I have found very disturbing over these last couple of days is that there is some wavering about people who used to campaign and pride themselves on being so-called moderates and pro-abortion rights are now caving. And I look at Senator Collins and Senator Murkowski, and I'm disappointed when I hear them, say friendly things about, oh, it might not be that bad, as was the case when, they confirmed Gorsuch. I'm very worried that same kind of apathetic wavering is going to happen again.
Well, I think it's a certainty, frankly. I think that, fool me once, shame on me, and all that stuff. I think the idea that there is such a thing as a moderate Republican is a fiction now. Mm-hmm. First of all, every Republican elected to the Senate votes for an extremist named Mitch McConnell to become majority leader. Secondly, the Susan Collins game, which we all know how it's played now, is they get these guys to pretend they're not going to be as horrible as we think, and then when they are as horrible as they think, they sort of go, oh, I had no idea. Well, you know what? Let's not be fooled by that game anymore. Let's make sure that the voters of Maine and Alaska know that Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski are always going to be on the wrong side of issues when it comes to a woman's body, a woman's right to choose, protecting health for Americans, protecting Americans from the rapacious bankers on Wall Street. They cannot be counted on ever.
Right, and then even on the Democrat side of the fence, I was shocked to see people. Well, I shouldn't really say shocked. I was more like disgusted and disappointed to see that Senators Joe Manchin and Heidi Heitkamp, who are facing re-election challenges in their home states of West Virginia and North Dakota, are similarly wavering. And what I find just puzzling about the logic is that, do they really think a Trump supporter is going to look at votes for, Gorsuch or Kavanaugh or the new, or not so new Secretary of State? Are they going to look at those votes and think of Manchin as like, oh, he might actually be more like me than I thought. I, a Trump voter, am going to cast a ballot for Joe Manchin. It just feels like a losing strategy that makes no sense to me.
No, there aren't those voters out there saying, I almost like Joe Manchin, and if you would only vote for a Republican judge, I'd like him. No, if anything, there are probably Trump voters in West Virginia. In fact, I'm sure there are who say, I like that Joe Manchin. I don't know if he was right about that Judge Kavanaugh guy, but he stuck to his guns and he said, this isn't the guy for me, and I don't care who tries to slip him past me. I think it's a raw deal, and I'm not going to vote for any guy that rolls over for the corporations. Now, I might not agree with Joe on that, but I appreciate his spine. That's, if anything, what's going to get a Trump voter to work with you or vote for you, but they're not going to do that. We know that.
Yeah, yeah.
I hate to be so negative, but yeah, Sanjeev, we had a guest on a couple weeks ago, David Ferris, talking about just expanding the Supreme Court when Democrats get back in power. That's what they should do, because otherwise we're going to be living in the new dark ages under these retrograde justices that we can never count on Joe Manchin or Heidi Heitkamp. We certainly cannot count on Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski. So, we're going to have to get tough. And if they cheat to put in their judge and not let Obama fill the seat he was supposed to fill, then we're going to have to, it's constitutional to expand the court, then we're going to have to look at expanding the court.
Yeah. And, what I like about that approach is that some may call it playing dirty. I consider that playing it principled. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Ferris called his book Time to Fight Dirty. I agree with you. It's not fighting dirty. It's standing up. It's standing up for the things you believe in. And it's about time that Democrats did that, or we got some Democrats who will, because we're not talking about, we have Democrats out there who think that the game is playing by the rules that Republicans ignore and walk all over every day, but it's not about playing by the made-up rules of Washington that aren't in the Constitution or anywhere else. It's by defending women's bodies and people who need health care and people who've lost their homes because of bank greed. That's who it's about.
I totally agree. I think that the American people are willing to, get into this, are really excited by people who are fighting for fairness. And I think that bringing that fight to fairness, whether that's to wages, healthcare, the Supreme Court, we definitely need to see much, much more of that. Richard, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on the Zero Hour. This has been a great conversation, and I feel like I've learned a lot more about how dangerous Kavanaugh is, and I think our audience has gotten a lot out of our conversation.
Well, thanks, Sanjeev. I appreciate it, and thanks for holding down the fort while I'm away.
Happy to do so.